I'm Christa Hill.
And I'm Renee Matsella.
And we are the founders of Tacit Edge, a tech education company dedicated to shifting the demographics of women and visible minorities graduating into product management at top companies around the world.
And this is our podcast, Product for Humans, where we explore the human side of product management. We'll answer all your burning questions like, what is product management? What is a product? How do you get started? And why do you belong in product management? That's right, because you belong. We hope you enjoy the show.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to Product for Humans. My name is Christa. I've got Renee and David here. Welcome, everyone, to this latest episode. Oh my goodness, while we're waiting for everyone to join, let's do a quick round the group here. Wins for this week, small or big? Renee, do you have any?
Ooh, wins. Oh my gosh. I don't know. We've hit a point where we've scaled a lot of what we're doing, so we have a lot more time. So I did some pretty good. I sent some pretty hard clients this week, which is my win.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
David, any big or small wins you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, well, we're doing a beta on something. We just released a new cohort into the beta, trying to double one of the types of engagement we're measuring, and it's looking good. Having a good week. Fun times.
Amazing. There's so many this week on my side. I don't even know where to start. Like Renee, speaking of that time and that concept of time, we were able to attend Mesh. We met an idol, Frances Haugen, which for those who are super product nerds would know that, she was the Facebook whistleblower. So it's huge to show that kind of corporate courage to take on folks when we're talking about like morality in our products. And then I got to teach at my daughter's school yesterday because, again, we have time and they were learning how to code. And I was like, hey, can I volunteer for this session? And before we jump to the code, can I teach you guys a couple of basic concepts? So I got to bring product managers to grade sixers. And also, we were able to record a podcast between my mom and my daughter, which was part of the homework called Generations, where my daughter got to ask my mom questions about her childhood. And it was such a magical week. And it's not even over yet. I can't even believe it. It's nice to feel like a parent that's not just like the annoying Grammarly icon that's just adjusting for language and small nuancey things. Like we can do something that was really fun and cool together. So yeah, what a week, eh?
Oh, I can't believe I forgot. Frances Haugen, that was definitely, that was kind of like, this feels like I'm meeting like David Bowie or something in products. Like,
yeah. And to know that she came to Calgary too, which was really exciting to see the emergence of Alberta, in this ecosystem of the world of technology and just how much more accessible our learnings is in our ecosystem, I thought was really striking to me. So hats off to Mesh, incredible conference, and the week's not over. We still have 2 events to go. So yeah. All right. Well, now that we're probably got whoever's going to join us live, let's, shall we get started? Let's do this. Yeah. All right. Well, folks, today I want to introduce you to David Ferris, who's been leading product management practices for 11 years at Jobber, an award-winning operations management software for home service businesses. David helped Jobber reach 200K home service pros who have over 27 million households and has invoiced over 40 billion. That's a B in services. Let's give a hand for scale. Holy cow. Welcome to the Product for Humans podcast, David.
Thanks. I love the name Products for Humans, by the way. It's really good because I find a lot of these like podcasts and product things can kind of sound like robots. Like tell us how you drive cross-functional alignment with your stakeholders towards a common vision, kind of like ChatGPT. So if I sound like a weird robot at any point, just let me know and I'll switch back to human.
I don't think that's possible for you, David. You're way too real. And we're so happy that you're here. Thank you for saying that. That's the point. We want to see that humans behind these incredible companies that have been built here in Alberta and around the world. And we know it's not easy. So we're so excited to dig into like what that experience was like.
Yeah. And really, the main motivator for us having you here is we thought to ourselves, we're launching an incredible initiative partnering with Technology in Alberta that sort of it just adds on to the incredible work we were able to do with Alberta Innovates and speaking to the value of product people, bringing them into organizations sooner. And we thought to ourselves, like, who do we know that is at the ground floor or was at the ground floor of an incredible success story in Alberta with a technology company and is still in there. So is able to see all of the seasons and all the shifts and the changes that happen as you go into high growth. And your name instantly, we were like, it's David. So thank you so much for joining us today and spending your lunch hour with us.
Thanks. And just to clarify, I'm just a small piece of the Jobber product puzzle. We have a really big team. So I'm like an individual contributor, but I've been there for 11 years. Very happy to share my experiences though.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, people always say that. Like, it's always a team effort, but like, own it. Seriously. Like, we know what it's like. We started up and we did we know it's always a team sport, but we know you had a huge part of it. So like, take it.
We'll brag for you.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do the bragging.
So I guess let's go back to the very beginning of your story. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role as a product leader at Jobber?
Yeah. So for a little bit of context for people, Jobber is, for anyone who hasn't heard about us, we're a platform that helps, service businesses be successful. So picture like someone coming to your house, a cleaner, a landscaper, a plumber. Jobber would be the platform they run their business on. So maybe you book them online, they give you a quote, eventually they do the work, they manage their team, they get paid, all of that kind of happens on our platform. So that's what we kind of do. And Jobber, I'm a senior product manager. I work on AI currently, but over the 11 years, I've kind of worked in like all of the different areas. Not all of them, but like most of them generally. And you would work in one area from like one to 3 years, then kind of move on to the next. So I've worked in mobile and most parts of the core product, but currently working in AI, which is very, very fun.
It's incredible. When you think about a product management career, and we hear about this a lot, AI didn't exist when we were starting our careers. So, I'm going to park that thought for a second because a little later in the conversation, let's talk about what like growth and entering and trying to build new products using new technologies that didn't exist when we were all starting our careers, what that looks like. But before we go there, can you tell us how did you land in product management?
Yeah. And for any of my pals listening, I'm sorry, you've probably heard this story a million times, but I find like every product manager has like a weird way they got into it. So like this one is mine essentially. So I went to university and I became a teacher, but I always wanted to work in tech. There's an Edmonton company called Nexopia that was kind of like a MySpace, early Facebook kind of competition. But I knew like people that worked. I'm like, oh, I'd love to work in tech, but I guess I'm not a tech person. So I got an ed degree and I taught for a few years and it wasn't really for me. Kind of had like an existential crisis and I was working at Remedy Cafe. For anyone here in Edmonton, I was the person that come out of the kitchen and be like, 3 samosas. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life now that I don't want to teach? And my old roommate actually was the first intern developer at Jobber and they were looking for a salesperson. I had done a little bit of like landscaping and stuff in the summer, like when I was in university. So I was like, I'll give it a try. I haven't done sales and did that for about a year. It was like, there was just 6 of us at that point. Very, very small. Company grew. Eventually they were like, hey, we need to spend more time on people after they purchased Jobber and think about that ongoing kind of experience and getting them to success. So I branched off and started doing that. That kind of like relationship building with customers, webinars, and just doing a lot of stuff that was just kind of like, it's nobody's job, but somebody has to do it kind of a thing. And then after a certain point, it was like, well, what's next? And they kind of rattled off a few different kind of potential roles. And I looked them up and product management was one of them. And when I read it, I was like, oh, this is actually like a clear articulation of what I think I actually had like wanted to do all this time, but I didn't recognize it till I saw it. So I started doing product management, which is really fun. Really quickly learned that I had no idea what I was doing and I didn't know anyone that knew what they were doing. So me and some friends started setting up some product community stuff, started as small meetups. We ended up doing Product Edmonton and I've set up a huge number of events as Product Edmonton, collaborated with Product Calgary and the APL program. I've got my APL program swag right here as well. And then bringing stuff to Edmonton, like I was the first one to bring in Silicon Valley Product Group to Alberta before COVID. and bringing in some of these things basically to help with training, because it's really, really tough. So as soon as you start to like find best practices and meet more people and network, it just becomes like a lot easier, I think. But that's pretty much how I got into it, was just like started early and worked my way into it.
Wow. And wow, someone we have here in the comments, throwback to Nexopia. I remember Nexopia. I was on there. And like, yeah, your story is so similar to so many of our students, where they read the job description for the first time and it's like, wait, this is a job? I can do this? This is a role I can do and get paid for? So it's cool to hear that you had a really similar experience to people who first discover product.
Totally. I'm just seeing the comments now, actually. I see some people I know there. Hey, Adam.
That's awesome. So maybe let's dive into what product management looked like in early days at Jobber. You mentioned things like there's a lot of jobs to be done. They just have to get done. We gotta figure it out. It's very divide and conquer-y. So it can mean your job description can be quite almost like a bit of a general list early days. Can you describe a little bit of what that was like, maybe year like 1 through 3 at Jobber?
Yeah, absolutely. And generalist is a really good way to say it. Like I was doing things where now like people would freak out. Like at one point I was doing our Twitter account, which like if anyone in marketing, who knows me now, would be like, that's the worst idea in the world to let Dave anywhere near our Twitter account. But yeah, it's all those random things. And I think that's the good thing with starting at a company early is you kind of get that bunch of people in a garage feeling. And then you get to see it kind of like gain steam over time. And you over the first couple of years that you do really get to see a lot of like successes and failures, people growing or people not growing. And it's kind of like being in this sort of like Shakespearean drama. And it's actually really kind of nice because like every year kind of feels like a new season in like a TV show. Like you'll get together with a bunch of old employees and it's like watching Lost, but you're like, what was better, Jobber season 3 or Jobber season 4? It's really good. But one weird dynamic, the flip side is like over time, you become like a smaller piece of it as it grows. And every time the company doubles in size, it just breaks, whether it's like 6 to 12 or 12 to 24 or 24 to 48, it just continues to break and continues to grow. But every time it kind of like regrows and the structures regrow, you're like a smaller piece of it. Like we used to do stand up every week. Everyone in the company would stand in a circle. There weren't many of us, and we'd go around and say what we did. Eventually you're not doing stand up, and eventually you actually don't even realize everybody at the company. And then eventually the company is so big that you can't see it all at the same time. You can't hold it all in your mind at the same time. And even the product that you used to know so well eventually becomes so big and complex, you can't hold it all in your mind at one time. And eventually everything has grown so much and you're a smaller part of it. But if you're lucky, you might be a smaller part in relative terms, but you might have grown in absolute terms. It's like kind of hard to describe, but that's kind of like what it feels like.
Honestly, I'm thinking right now back to folks that I worked with over the years, and they say, do you remember a few years ago when we all used to get together and it was this magical time that everyone thinks back on? And I love your viewpoint on looking at it. It's like, okay, so it's not going to be like that anymore because we've outgrown that, but it's the best problem to have. It means that we are growing and it's shifting. And there are times when you do recognize that you do like a company at a certain size, and that's kind of your jam. Right. And then you're forever sort of chasing that experience again, even though it's really not even possible anymore. Can you describe for us what you think your favorite size of a company is, where you've done your best work?
I think my favorite size, I always just say it's like the size it is now. And I know like not everybody would think that way. It's I know a lot of people that were like, it got to a certain size and like, you know what, I actually really like this size. I'm going to go find another company this size. Or maybe they're like, I want to go work for the biggest company I can find. I kind of like watching like the continuous journey because like we really are still just getting started, even though we've been around for so long. So I always just say like what it is now, because I think part of the success is just like really just like enjoying and nerding out over what you're doing in the moment. Yeah.
That's a the most Zen response. Just enjoy the moment. Yeah. Like each size of company has different challenges, different benefits. I hope we can all like take that to heart. Yeah. And I'm curious, like, how did your product, you mentioned that you discovered product and like all of a sudden things just started to get easier. When did that happen? And what were some of the things that you did that made it easier?
Yeah, I think like as the company grows and the practice grows, it's often because things aren't going well. Or it's often like you're thinking about how things are structured and you're like, is this normal? Or like other places doing this. And like riffing on something you said earlier about being a generalist, I think a lot of it is that moving away from being a generalist at a small size company more into specialization. In the early days, like nobody really knows what they're doing. You're trying to learn really fast. You're trying to build a network. And as a product manager, if you're the first product manager, you probably just like own a team, some kind of scrum team, and you work on things. It could be any kind of things, like you work on the product. And as you start to add more people, you start to like, maybe there's multiple PMs working on multiple teams and they all do everything. But at some point there's some structure where it's like, okay, we need kind of like to divide and conquer. So you kind of bucket things. And I find early on companies kind of do it around certain goals. So like, we need a team that's going to build feature X, and we need a team that's going to like rebuild this app. And it's not really like you care about customer needs, but you're not really like aligning the company around them. And as you add more PMs this way, you kind of end up with this conflation of like, you have teams that are like owning user problems, teams that are owning parts of the user journey, teams that are owning like parts of like the platform that people would experience your product on. Like you might have like a mobile team, which is kind of interesting. And as generalists, even as you're growing, I think like people are jumping around from teams really fast. Like you might own one of those things for a short time, move off into like another area and do a swap. And, there's some like loss of knowledge, but you kind of have to do that when you have very limited people and limited resources. Like, hey, we need someone to rebuild the app. Okay, this is what you're going to be doing for the next while. And then as the company grows, and you're kind of like researching best practices like alongside all this stuff and what to do, like you learn how to get really good at one thing over time. And I think at some point where we are now with like product management is like, just people have more expected of them. It's like we all own very specific parts, like enduring ownership of like part of like it's more like customer centric things. Like let's say you own part of like the workflow of a customer. Like maybe you own something like getting paid. Customers want to get paid. That would be kind of the thing you own. And all of those other things, like, like when you think of someone like we have like an AI team, we have a mobile team, we have a growth team. It's like every PM just needs to be able to do those things. Every PM, whether they're working in like this area, that area, like those aren't necessarily like things to have a team around. They're things everybody should be able to do. So like every PM should be able to do an A/B test. Every PM should be able to work on mobile. Every PM should be able to use AI in their area. And that's kind of like the change of mindset. And then people can go deeper into like those areas. And even now, like this is like fairly new, but like leadership is really trying to like kind of like redivide sort of like a lot of the day-to-day kind of backlog stuff, kind of like more towards the development and free up more product manager time to go even deeper into that problem space, which is really good. And it's like, it'll probably be really different a couple of years from now. It's just like constantly watching that change from generalization to specialization has been pretty interesting. And things that used to have whole teams around, are actually just tools. Like even we have multiple growth teams, but they're aligned around the customer journey, like more around like pirate metrics. There's teams that are really focused on making our existing customers successful. And we have teams that are about, helping new customers get up to success. And there's just like a little bit more structure than saying like it's a growth team.
Right. And you think about like the role of product in helping to create those new framings for an investment that we're making, what value might we derive, and then how might we, organize people towards those problems or those outcomes that are changing over time because the business is changing. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to watch even just how the leadership team was perceiving product and how they were using it, like based on very early days, jack of all trades, you're in there, you're on Twitter, to now being in a place where, you're really doing the work around understanding the needs of the ideal customer that you're serving so that you can keep driving more value from that relationship?
Yeah, I think like as the company grows, it's like you're getting like a lot deeper into like the problem space, like for a very specific thing. And then I think the other thing that changes the most is like how you're communicating that to leadership or to like other people. It's kind of interesting. Like you're going deeper, but in your communications, I guess you learn to tailor it more to the audience. Like in the early days, everything's kind of flat. So I was very used to just like always diving into the details, research user problems, go through the data and be like, just like really hyper specific when I'm talking about everything. And that was actually kind of a hard habit to break. One thing that I did for like probably far too long is, like, let's say I'm presenting something to like, the manager of my manager's manager. Like we don't have that many like levels of or whatever, but like let's say like hypothetically you're doing that. There's this tendency I would have to just go in and just get super granular and right off the bat. And the problem is like if you go in really granular, like as granular as you can get, you're never going to know the answer to the follow-up questions because you're starting at like the most granular place. And that's actually not the place like leadership at that point really cares about. You kind of think of like, they're in a hot air balloon and they're like looking over the landscape. You're representing part of that landscape and you don't really need to give all that granular detail. And one thing my manager once told me that was really good is like, think of like, how does this compare to like presenting ideas at like a board level? Like imagine you're going in and you're presenting these things to somebody who spends like less time in the product. They're passionate about the space, but they don't have all that knowledge of the nitty gritty, So one thing I think that I do is I like, I'll kind of like write out my outline and I'll stick to like, if you imagine like the headings and the hierarchy of things, I stick to the top few bullet points. And then I ask like, do I need to go down more? Do I need to get into more detail? And that ability to always be able to zoom in on demand and answer those questions is really, really good because it builds trust. And that's one of the most important things in a big company is in a small company, people just know what you can do. And they tend to trust you. In a bigger company, you constantly are having to earn that trust with a larger and larger, more complicated organization. So being able to tailor those communications, like that's just a random example, but is like ultra important, I think, especially when you could go infinitely deep on user problems. You don't necessarily have to be like telling everybody all that stuff all the time.
That is such great advice because learning how to communicate with all levels of the organization in the format that is the most useful to them is really how we can move and learn faster, right? Getting into the weeds of all the details of all the things sometimes isn't necessary. I mean, it's great to know all that detail, but whether or not it shows up in the report or is just a part of the conversation on demand is really, that's really the job, right? So when you think about like how you were communicating and the level of detail, were there risks early days in Jobber that from a product perspective, you were able to communicate and help to avoid some failures, or maybe you walked into a few? Can you share some observations on what failure was like during early days?
Yeah. I would say anything involving like change management, our customers are basically trusting us to run their business. And it's so important. Like we could literally like, if we go down, someone literally cannot invoice their customers. They can't even see their schedule for the day. So it's a really big deal. So we take change management very seriously. And I think like a really good example of that would be like in the early days, I think we would like make a change and we wouldn't think about it. Like we would think about it, but not in such a structured way. I think now when we make changes, we're a lot better at saying like, who are the people that are going to understand kind of like the main pain points of this change management? And it's usually going to be like people on the client facing team. So being able to leverage that is really important. Like, for example, we used to have like 1 billion items in our side nav and it was so complicated. So I was on a team and we're like, we're going to simplify the side nav. We're going to eliminate a lot of the things and we're going to actually retire whole parts of our product, which is something we hadn't done very often. We actually retired quite a bit of like whole chunks and pages out of the product. And it did require going through with the client facing team a lot and being like hyper specific on like, what are the actual pain points we're going to have? And then prioritizing them, like which are the things that we absolutely have to fix? What are the things we can kind of mitigate? What are the things that we're just going to live with? Yeah, just like I think like going that extra level with the other people and other teams is really important. Whereas like in an earlier stage, you tend to be like, just do it yourself, which is really, really bad. Especially with high risk changes, because like, what are the odds that you, like one person, are going to have like the best ideas or understand all the gotchas? Yeah, probably not very, very good.
Yeah, it's a team sport. product the teams work do that all the time. And that's like such a perfect example of where you need to be collaborating with others. But I want to say kudos to retiring products. I think that's a big part of the product method that sometimes we forget about, that product management is all about really finding the most important solution, the one solution that is the 20% that can achieve the 80% of the value. So trimming that back and saying, oh, actually, we don't need this anymore. That's product mindset in practice right there. So kudos.
It's really hard. I find with like retiring things, the only reason we retired things is because we were able to sort of like articulate what the benefit would be, like for the user and for the company. In this case, it was like, there's a value in simplifying the product. And that was sort of like what was used to make the case for like, hey, there's this page that only X% of users use. And there's this other page, like a dashboard that X% of people use. Like, if we took them out, we think it could have like this kind of an impact. And yeah, that's pretty much what you need to retire stuff. Otherwise, it's really hard because if you retire anything, there's always going to be a few customers that really, really like that thing. Even if it's a small handful, they can be really vocal. So you kind of need a counterweight on the other side to like, why is it worth it actually for not just them, but maybe your next, your next customers and your current customers and the company.
And what is it like when that highly vocal person has a direct line to the CEO?
Well, we're lucky. We have like we don't really, I think we'd worry about it more if we were in like enterprise where we had these like couple really big customers. We have a really high number of kind of like similar sized businesses in the grand scheme of things. And some of them though will like reach out directly, and they are very, very vocal, some of them, because like, they own businesses. They're like really like sophisticated people. They're super smart, driven people. So yeah, you definitely do get that. But I think it's a lot easier. If we were an enterprise, I think it'd be a lot harder to think about those things.
Oh, that is so interesting to think about, again, that concept of sunsetting so that our product isn't getting so bloated that we can't afford to maintain it. We're reducing risk in failure because we don't have the bloat. I think all of us as product managers, can regale each other with stories around technical debt and what happens when things become too brittle and too big and too interdependent. And then, we've painted ourselves into some kind of corner. And it's a massive skill to be able to say, okay, what are people only using rarely? How might we maybe figure out what the need is behind that one thing? And is it something that is valuable for us to solve anymore? Like it was at some point in time, right? We needed it at some point in time, but what has shifted in the type of user that we're trying to attract to our platform that is the most valuable for? So again, we're building towards that ideal state instead of all the edge cases around that ideal state all the time. Like when I say things like that, how, in the conversations that you have with your teams, how does that show up?
Yeah, and as a bigger company, it's easier because you can do that better segmentation. Like you're saying, like which customers want the thing. In the earlier days, you think of your customers as not a monolith, but you have less like degrees of articulation for like what the the different like segments and stratification of that monolith are. So like when you are able to dig in with data and say like, okay, this is our ideal customer right now, or this is the customer we're strategically focused on, like what is their usage like versus these other ones, you'll find all sorts of like outliers. Like we have all sorts of workarounds where if we make a change, it might affect a workaround. And then you look at some of the companies using these workarounds and they're like companies you wouldn't expect to be using Jobber in the first place. So being able to understand that is really important because for us, we make software that's used by countless industries, like everything from someone who picks up and diaper drop off, like cloth diaper service, to like somebody that, is cleaning bins and millions of other types of things. So they all want different things and they're all trying to map their business onto the software slightly differently. So knowing how that shows up in the data is really, really important because we have just like a huge amount of outliers, I would say, compared to other software where I think the users would behave a little bit more similarly.
Oh, that is so fascinating. So how do you communicate to people internally? Like this is our key customer. We're gonna disappoint some others so we can make this customer happy? Like, how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, I think it's like going back to like the value of like saying like if we simplify our navigation, we're getting rid of these things, but for like the next people that use it, they'll get to value that much faster and they'll be that much more successful. Like being able to talk about those things. And I think also being able to like articulate the different segments in really easy to understand ways is important. Like for us, we do scheduling. So, is it somebody doing like a simple one-off where they come to your house once? Is it recurring work? Is it seasonal recurring work? Like there's different ways to talk about different types of work. Is it like a longer construction job where they're coming and doing multiple visits? We have a whole shared language that we've developed around how people schedule, and those tend to like correlate to how they would invoice and how they would quote and other things like that. And there's just like lots of different ways to slice it, but it's a lot more useful when you have kind of like shared language around the company and everybody kind of knows like, oh, it's this type of use case. I can understand that. And I think product managers have a big role in kind of identifying those and kind of evangelizing them so people kind of understand what they are.
I mean, you mentioned a couple times around data, right? Like with the data says this, and we're using a lot of proof points and facts to support our, assumptions or hypothesis or things that we're figuring out. Can you share with us early days, when you were doing a deep dive and really getting into the weeds, what kind of data you would be looking for and how that shifted now in the size that the company is and what kind of tools you have now for that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
David. It was the scrappy product management in the beginning.
Yeah, it was, and I like to think we're still pretty scrappy, but we were very scrappy at the start because we had very little data. I remember like at one point, it was like all spreadsheet based. Like you're taking information and you're using it in spreadsheets. And there's ways I would do that well, and there was ways where I would do that very poorly. And I'll give you an example of both. But an example of doing it well would be like one thing I was like, let's take all of our feedback and start bucketing it manually because we didn't have as much quantitative data at the time, but we had a lot of qualitative data at the time, and we were rebuilding our app. So we could take all of the feedback that people have. And like the good thing with having lots of customers and lots of vocal customers is we'd have huge amounts of feedback. So I could take 1,000 pieces of feedback, put it in a spreadsheet and bucket it, what's the theme and then what's the actual ask. If we were to rebuild this thing, what would the MVP be based off this bucketing? Like, what do people care about the most? And then talking to those customers to validate those. Like, we think 20% of the feedback is about them needing this thing. Let's talk to them and kind of validate it. And that was like a really, really useful, kind of that very crude bucketing. And I still do it all the time. Like, I spend a lot of my time bucketing in spreadsheets still. I find it really great. Whether it's like recently I was looking through like we have data about like why someone didn't buy us, and going through and just like really granularly bucketing them and like reading through all the notes, and you really learn a lot. You can also do it really poorly though. I remember early on, I really got into using these spreadsheet based like prioritization tools, and I like love spreadsheets and prioritization tools. Like I love those things. That I saw this one tool called like Cano Analysis, and it's like the coolest thing is a mental model. It's like, like if I come into a room and there's a box of donuts on the table, I'm delighted. But if I go into a room and there's not donuts, I didn't expect them, so it doesn't matter. That's a delighter. If I come into a room and there's no oxygen, I'm really sad. If I come into a room and there is oxygen, I don't notice. That's a must have. And then you have things that scale linearly with like performance, like the mileage of a car. And there's all these different ways of thinking about value. And it turns out you can survey customers and you can ask them how they would feel if a feature is present and not present, put it in a spreadsheet, and it'll tell you what percentage of people think something's a delighter or a must have, or it scales with performance, or they're indifferent to it. And it's like a really cool tool. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to use this tool. So I spent a bunch of time making this survey, sending it out, ended up all these beautiful charts, beautiful graphs. And it was actually like the biggest waste of time ever. I could have just like called a couple of those customers and just had that conversation and just asked them. And I think it's really hard early on because you don't really know like the ROI you're going to get off of different tools and techniques. Whereas now data is really easy. Qualitatively, like we have a huge fire hose of data. And then on the quantitative side, each team has a dedicated analyst, and I'm always lucky to work a really great analyst. So every morning I have like 15 dashboards for the AI stuff I'm working on, and I can go through and, spot things, anything that's, looks like it needs to get dug into deeper. And I can also dig through the qualitative side because we have like constant qualitative feedback coming in. It's just like, at that point, getting the data is a lot easier. It's more about like refining it for the right audience. What combination of qualitative and quantitative stuff are you going to use to like get a message across?
I love this story because I just see the arc of even just our own careers where we had very feature driven feedback conversations versus problems we're solving for the customer, right? Like, I think, if we look at when we go from junior to senior in our career, early days as a junior, we're really excited to talk about a feature that we can do for you. Would you like it? And of course, the customer is going to say like, yeah, I'd be into that. Just like how you said with the donuts, like I didn't realize I needed it and it's not good for me at all, but I'm delighted to be given the option versus oxygen. That's a problem to solve. Right. Yeah. Like, I love how you phrase that, David. Like, it's so interesting to talk to seasoned product career folks that we go through these various phases where talking to a person, like a human being, was way more valuable than spending probably 2 days formatting and making that spreadsheet perfect and coming up with all these scenarios. And we could have just picked up a phone and called somebody and just had a conversation.
Piggybacking off you said there too, like I think it's interesting, like the more time I've worked in product, the less time I talk about the product when I talk with customers. It sounds like paradoxical, but my early days, like, I cringe when I think of it. I'd probably call up a customer and be like, "Excuse me, fellow human, what is the correct set, sequence, and scope of features that will solve your problem?" Whereas now, like, when I call and talk to a customer, I try not to talk about Jobber very much, unless that's specifically the point of the call. It's more of like the jobs to be done kind of approach where I'm like, before you were using us, what were you using? What problem were you trying to solve? And at what point did you think, like in an infomercial, there's got to be a better way? I want to talk more about those origin stories of why somebody was using something to solve a problem, what that problem was, and what made them want to switch maybe to like another solution, and have those conversations instead of like what in the product. If I want to know what in our product is meeting their expectations or not, that's a totally great conversation. But for a lot of those other conversations, I want to minimize how much I talk about the product.
David, I think we've hit on something here that like I really just want to put an exclamation point around. Especially when we talk to entrepreneurs and startup founders, and they're very like every conversation they have is very much about the product because of the point of pride they have around it too. And when you think about applying product management principles in a startup environment, this is what you get. You get people that are not selling the solution. They're actually having conversations around problems and how might we improve the product based on solving these problems instead of the feature set, what the solution is today. Let's stay focused on the value and the problem that we're solving so that the problems can lead our roadmaps instead of the feature sets creating that trajectory in our roadmap. So just staying on that same theme for a second, can you maybe just reflect on what were the core drivers for the roadmap in the beginning versus what are the core drivers for the roadmap now at Jobber? What's shifted, if anything?
Yeah, I'd say, that's a really tough one. Like within the areas, it's always sort of like laddering up to what the company thinks is the most important thing within your area. And that changes a lot over time. And it can be really challenging because sometimes within like your like local maximum, you might think something is like the most important thing to do, but it might not contribute to like the bigger strategy. And the tricky thing with strategy is it's really about, saying like, we're going to limit, greatly restrict the types of things we're doing to have this outsized impact. So like, there's been times where there's something that like I would love to have on the roadmap and I'm very passionate about it and it just isn't the right time. And then like 2 years later, that thing is being worked on and it is then the most important thing. And oftentimes it's like more about that like global thing at the company and what's more important. And that gets way more challenging. Like early on, everybody kind of knows what the most important thing is, whether or not you're the person deciding it, like you kind of know it. Whereas when the company gets a lot bigger, it's really hard to say what the most important thing is because you have these like multiple goals going at the same time. And it's not always clear like what ladders up to that. At this point, I think just like over communication is key and always trying to like reach up to the next thing and say like, how is what I'm doing like a leading indicator to something else that's important? Because sometimes the goals are just like these really big unmovable things. So being able to like chain different work and different initiatives together from a very granular to like strategic level is really, really important.
And so how have your communication tactics changed then based on that concept? Sorry, Renee, I didn't
All good, go for it.
Right. So when you think about like, early days, we are all super connected because we're live streaming with each other, feedback that's showing up, right? We have our stand-up where everyone is there in the morning versus now we don't do that. We have our individual stand-ups with our individual teams, and we're not slightly, but we're very disconnected from what could be the overarching vision and strategy and what success metrics that the organization has. So can you take us on a little bit of like early days, David? How would you communicate that with your teams versus say how your practice has evolved to how you do it now?
Yeah, I think early on it's easier to have a direct line, and also the goals are like often like less measurable because you just don't have as much data and things like that.
It's a survival.
It's very different, and you'll make goals, but they're not great goals. The way that like more mature companies make really good goals. And when you have like a more mature company with really good goals, like often the thing you're laddering to is this like outrageously large thing, like we want to grow faster, or like those types of goals. And it's really, really hard. So that's when it's like really important, I think, to be able to like kind of what I was talking about earlier, like zooming out and zooming in, like, am I in the hot air balloon or am I in the trenches? And drawing a line, between all those things. Like, let's say the company wants to grow faster. It's like, okay, with which segment, which type of user? Okay, well, maybe we could focus on that. It's like constantly like subdividing those into smaller things. They get smaller and smaller. And it's like, okay, what are the reasons this customer might not use your product or might, not be retained in your product? And, maybe you come up with a bunch of hypotheses, kind of like a tree, and you keep going down this ladder of metrics. And at the end, it's like, okay, well, maybe the customer is using the software and it's unclear how their work maps onto it. Onboarding's tough. There's a dozen different reasons. Like, this is the one we want to focus on. Can we measure the workaround pain of just this like one workaround? And maybe you do. Maybe you're able to say like, this is the actual pain caused by this one workaround, which then we know affects the adoption of this one segment of customer, and kind of like bubble it up to the top. And being able to like talk to your team about the more granular thing, and then being able to like talk to like leadership about those like higher level things is really important in that kind of like chain of metrics, because it just gets so complicated. And there might be multiple types of strategic kind of initiatives going on. So maybe you need to prioritize against like multiple things, which is really important to communicate. One tool I find really useful for that is kind of like I think it's called like the scorecard or balanced scorecard. I can't remember, but it's like a spreadsheet where it's like, here's all the things we want to do. Here's how they're scored against this strategic initiative. And then you also score them against the other ones, and you can kind of like weight them. And I find that's a really good one for switching levels, because it's like, if you're talking with somebody and it's getting in too much into like the minutia of like what is the right thing to be doing, you can kind of shift it up to like, why are we doing something? Like, our goal is our goal growth? Is our goal retention? It can be like anything you put in them. Is it like being able to like weight those things and shift the conversation up to like why something is worth doing versus like what the specific things that you could do are, I think is like really useful.
And I love how you describe that. Like, you really described how great product companies have focused, outcome-based goals at a very high level. And we ladder down and we're given leeway to say, oh, how might we move that goal by looking at the data? Based on our experience working with lots of companies, like, that is rare. Lots of companies are saying, well, we want 25 different things to move. And a lot of it's like, we want to launch this thing. We want to build this feature. What role did product management play in bringing that focus strategy to Jobber?
Yeah. I would say just like bringing in kind of like, shared language and like shared frameworks of ways of doing these things. It's like finding a consistent way to work with your developers, designers, leadership, and kind of these like product suggested kind of like, I kind of think of it in terms of like the product managers are sort of like, it's like work is a game. And like, I'm not going to say it's a game, like, especially if it's like a performance review, I'm not going to say like work is a game, but I kind of think of it as like playing, like, I'm like the dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. And when you think about what a game is, it's basically just like a shared set of rules that everybody has so they can have this shared experience. You can do these things and you can't do these other things. And you're kind of like the dungeon master as a product team. You're kind of facilitating this kind of game where you're all playing, where you're trying to like surface the most important problems and then like what the best way to solve them is. And I think as a product manager, you kind of control the rules of that game, which is really important because you're just a player in the game and the best ideas will often come from somewhere else. You're playing the game in the way where everybody feels their ideas are being equally represented and being judged apples to apples. If they bring a new idea, they're instantly seeing it relative to other ideas within the game, which is really important. And also product doing that facilitates healthy conflict. Jobber is really good, I think, at healthy conflict, and it's kind of expected of us. If you don't think something is being done right, you'll just say it. And to do that, you all have to be playing the same game. I think it's just like really important. Like healthy conflict in a team is a very important thing, and a product manager facilitates that. And when you do that, the best ideas tend to come forward. But I think that's like one of the biggest roles of a product.
It is so incredible. And, we hear the term conflict. And when I hear that term, a bunch of people might get like, what do you mean like conflict all the time? And it's like, well, is it conflict or is it tension? Right? Like that healthy tension between these groups that we're all collaborating. Everybody wants all the great stuff. But the question is, how might we bring together a common language so that we're all communicating? And if we're saying no to something, everyone knows why. And it's that healthy tension between what is our goal versus what is possible. What sort of technology are we looking at? What are our capabilities as teams? Like, what is just now possible? And, having product help to curate that conversation is an incredible thing for companies of all sizes. So with that in mind, like what, if we were to take this even at a higher level now, David, like you're at the ground floor of not just at Jobber, but also at bringing together community in product management, helping to find pathways for folks to grow and to get education. What do you hope for product in Alberta?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's interesting. So going into like, COVID, everything changed. And I think a lot of companies switched to remote work. One thing that I noticed is like a lot of my friends that were product managers, like, are all of a sudden working at companies that aren't based in Alberta. And likewise, we have a lot of product managers at Jobber that are based in all sorts of places. So basically having a really strong community, I think, is important. People used to be like, well, we have to hire and develop product managers in Alberta because there's not enough of them. That used to be like a really big issue, and it still is. But it's easier to dismiss it now because like, well, we can hire people somewhere else. So I think like building a really strong community is incredibly important now. And I think there's a really good opportunity when I think of something like artificial intelligence. Like I truly believe like every product manager is going to need to be able to use it in the same way every good product manager now needs to be able to like run A/B tests and do mobile. Like you're going to need to use AI in your space. And Alberta should be a leader in that because we have such a strong AI community. But I feel like a lot of that strong community is more on like the academic side. And I know there's like a lot of great startups and everything too. But when I think of like a lot of the best AI product managers I've met, a lot of them are from other places. So I think there's like, that's probably one of many opportunities, but I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to like really like level up like the success of product managers in Alberta by connecting them to some of these new things. I think the product management landscape is going to change a lot over the next few years.
And so you made that leap to become an AI product manager, arguably with the same experience that we might have with AI in our day-to-day lives. And a lot of folks won't apply for these jobs or go after these opportunities because they don't think they've got the right experience. So can you share a little bit about what's unique about you that you felt like I could be an AI product manager?
Oh, I got lucky. They asked if I would do it. But yeah, I did.
The average person.
Well, there are a lot of really great courses. I took some courses from the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. So like I had some background and I always had played with AI, but I'd never used it for work before. And then in my personal life, everybody uses ChatGPT and all that stuff. I think it's just like getting excited about something and being able to learn about it really quick. Also, AI is so much easier to do than it was a couple years ago. Like I feel like a Gen AI poser because it's so easy to ship value compared to even like 3 or 4 years ago. It's absolutely wild. I think there's going to be so many products coming out over the next year that are just going to absolutely blow people's minds. And kind of that stuff where it's like things that feel like they should be 5 years away are going to be like 1 year away.
Yeah. Well, related to that, like Adam asked in the chat, like, how do you get some of this creative experience? You were able to find some creative ways to find experience in AI. How do you keep your skills up to date if you're not a product person yet, but you want to become one? What are some avenues to get some cool experience?
Yeah, I like Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute and places like that have some really good like AI specific courses. There's actually like an infinite amount of AI courses, but I would say just like learning how to make basic assistants in chatbots and things like that is really easy to do. Like when I wanted to do it, I think I just threw $10 of credits in Chat GPT and started like learning how to use it. It's pretty easy to spool up stuff. And getting into product management and AI, like basically getting experience with that stuff is really good. It's like, what's a product that you can make? And it's like really fast and cheap to make some of these things. Like, what's a problem you can solve, even if you're just making like a proof of concept? I think that just getting in and rolling up your sleeves and doing it is good because it's like, it's much easier than it used to be.
It really is. Speaking of it being easier than it used to be, like, how do you see AI changing product practices? Because a lot of product practice is about quickly prototyping to reduce risks so we don't build so much, but building might become a little bit cheaper now. With AI, we can develop so much faster. How do you think this might change product and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think of this, the future is like I have some sort of like it's going to be the year of the co-pilot or the assistant, and my assistant is going to talk to another assistant to figure out the right time for a thing to happen. There's going to be a lot more of those dynamics, and I think it's hard to imagine what it's going to be like because people are so used to like the horrible chatbots that we currently have. Like I remember when chatbots came out and they're kind of like a choose your own adventure, like if I rules based, like if I say this, it's going to do this and it's going to offer me these options. And even chatbots now aren't great because I think a lot of the AI stuff isn't like, a lot of it is tied to business value more than user value yet. And I think there's a lot of promise. When I think about it like a chatbot, I think a lot of companies are like, we're going to make a support chatbot because we're going to save money every time it solves a problem and it doesn't have to talk to a person. That's not a customer problem. So you can go and make a chatbot that solves a third of customers' problems so they don't have to talk to a human, but you've made life worse for 2/3 of your customers. And I think the big difference is over the next while, it's going to be able to like live up to that promise where it's actually helping like almost all the customers. And that's going to be hard for people to wrap their heads around. You're going to go from having like, I'm having a problem with my product and I ask a question, like I forgot my password, right now it'll probably say like, I don't know what to do. And then you got to like wait to talk to a human and maybe you talk to a human or you don't. Maybe it's like very frustrating. It'll go from that to answering it all the time to eventually it'll just walk you through resetting your password. It'll start doing things for you. So being able to like realize the value that AI is about to do is going to be like really important. I think the other angle too is like, I think it's going to be a really good like tool for research. There was a product manager at Jobber who was using we have like a chat bot and they were like playing with it. It's in beta. But they were asking it all these questions about the feature they wanted to build. Like, what are customers going to ask this chat bot about this feature? I thought it was really interesting because I can imagine like I would love to have like a chat bot where customers can submit feedback and it actually kind of does like an interview, gives you summaries. You can kind of go through and get all this amazing because our customers want to give us feedback. Like having like a large language model that just like interviews them, sorts it. So when I want to do a certain thing, I'm like, here's all these customers, here's what they said. I can follow up with them. I think there's some really powerful kind of like research and voice of customer type stuff AI is going to do. It's just like tough to tough to predict how it's all going to go down, but it's very exciting. Even as a product manager or like anyone on my team for like how my company works, every company has a million different different processes, and there's wikis and there's help docs. Even being able to use AI to just like quickly surface the answer to anything I need is going to be like really important. And that's not even to mention like the generative stuff, like write an email. Like that's the stuff I think people focus on, but to me, that's the least exciting part of it. Like, yeah, it can write me a great email, but it's like, knowing like who is the right combination of like humans within the company to accomplish a certain thing, or like which are the right customers to talk to about this really specific thing that I'm able to find thematically instead of verbatim is like, it's just like so many things it's going to be able to do.
So many incredible product ideas just came out of your mouth. Could you imagine if everybody's Confluence was like you could find stuff in there? I mean, like, I'm just like throwing a stone out there.
You're
like, what if all the documentation was useful?
Imagine, that one person, like, it's often the product person, the one person that people go to ask every single question, and like 70% of our time it's an answer questions. What if? Oh, could you
imagine that world, Renee?
I have zero doubt that right now, like Confluence, like Jira, like they're working on that. I'm certain of it. Every single product is going to have some kind of like agentive presence come out of it over the next year that's going to do these things. Like we use, that's like a lot of the tools we use, like you can kind of see, like even in Jira, they have like a lot of like AI, like magic baked into it. They don't have like an agentive, like assistant copilot entity that I know of, but like they're baking in like summarization and all this sort of like Gen AI stuff. Like no doubt at some point they're going to have something that pops up that you can pay for. That's just like, what do you want to know about your company? What do you want to know about work in progress? What do you want to know about the right ways to do things? What do you want to know about your benefits? Like all of these things, questions you might have as an employee living in one place, like there must be hundreds of people trying to use AI to solve that right now. It's going to be really valuable. And I think we're going to see these little agentive presences pop up in every single product we use over the next year.
I love how when you bring product people together, naturally product ideas just start percolating. That is amazing. So David, like to bring this all together, when you think about your journey in product, what advice would you give a startup early days about how they create their product teams and how quickly to bring in a product manager? Like based on what you've seen and your whole trajectory, what's some advice you could offer?
Yeah, I would say if you're curious if it's the right thing for your company, talk to a product manager, but like talk to another entrepreneur too that hired a product manager, and just like interview them basically. Like it's super basic advice, but that's what I would just talk to a PM, talk to a company that hired a PM and kind of go from there.
Awesome. Well,
talk to a person.
It always goes back to talking to a person. It's funny how that works. Well, and if you are curious about product management, what it can do for your company, talking to someone, we do a program that we've launched with Technology Alberta where you can practice some product practices and learn them from me and Christa and the folks at Technology Alberta. David, maybe you'll stop in for one of the coaching sessions we have. We'd love to have you. So if you're an entrepreneur or a scaling technology company and you're like, oh my gosh, I want some of this magic that David brought to be able to refine our strategy, focus our resources, reduce our risks, check it out. The link is in the comments. Krista, how do you want to wrap us up?
Oh, David, are you hiring?
I got one.
Yeah, David.
I got one. Somebody asked a question that I didn't get to. Colby. Hi, Colby. I know Colby already, but Colby asks, are there tools and methods most effective for prioritizing pain points and product features? There's a bunch of really great out-of-the-box tools out there. RICE prioritization is really good. It's like reach, impact, confidence, effort. You can always do value over effort. The key is like really articulating what value is and making it less subjective. Like if your big goal is growth, value is what would have the biggest impact of growth. So like value over effort or RICE prioritization are like really good, easy to use tools and a really good way to just like get all your ideas in one place so they're apples to apples.
Amazing.
All right. Cover is always hiring, so check out our career page.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David, so much for sharing. There were so many nuggets out of this conversation for practicing product people, for companies who are looking to experiment with product management. Thank you for your time and your candor. It's such a pleasure chatting with you. And hopefully we get to see you maybe in person. We're going to try and spend a little bit more time in Edmonton over the next year and a bit. So thank you.
Come to Edmonton. We'll go to H2O Lounge.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, that sounds amazing. Thank you, David. And thank you everyone who joined us online. We really appreciate you. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, rate and review this podcast, and you might find your review in a future episode. Please subscribe to Product for Humans wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. To get more information about Product for Humans and our content, please visit our website at tacit-edge.com, tacit-edge.com. We'll see you next time. Okay? Should we do it one more time?
Sweet. Yeah, let's do it.